So, good morning. Second year Bcom. Computer applications, semester 4, fourth semester, object oriented programming in C++. Second year Bcom computer applications, fourth semester, object oriented programming in C++. And first year BA computer applications, semester 2, second semester, programming in C++. Today's concept is what are constructors, destructors, their properties and their characteristics, how to create constructors and destructors in C++, different types of constructors and destructors. So all these topics we may cover here. So what is a constructor? A constructor is a special function that is a member of a class and has the same name as that class. So constructors are also some type of functions. Generally they are called as special functions having the same name as the original class. So original class ki constructor class ki okay name manam use chestam. So constructors cannot constructor has no return type specified in C++. Constructors cannot return values and thus have no return type. So generally another important point of using constructor is why we require constructor means generally they are used to initialize. Some private variables of a class. Private variables of a class ను మనం ఇనిషియలైజ్ చేయడానికి మనం కన్స్ట్రక్టర్ అనేది యూస్ చేస్తాం. కన్స్ట్రక్టర్ నేమ్ అనేది క్లాస్ నేమ్ కింద ఒకేలాగా ఉంటాయి అన్నమాట. అలాగే కన్స్ట్రక్టర్స్ అనేవి హ్యాస్ నో రిటర్న్ టైప్ వాల్యూస్. జనరల్లీ దే హ్యావ్ నో రిటర్న్ వాల్యూస్ ఆర్ రిటర్న్ టైప్స్. Next one is destructors. So what is a destructor? The complement of a constructor is called as a destructor. There are many reasons why a destructor may be needed. For example, an object may need to deallocate memory that it had previously allocated, or it may need to close a file that it had opened. In C++, it is the destructor that handles deactivation events. The destructor has the same name as the constructor, but it is preceded by a tilde symbol. So what is the destructors? Destructors are also special type functions, and destructors also have the same function name as the original class, but the difference between a constructor and destructor is in destructors we may use a destructors with some tilde symbol toti manamu use chestam. So generally why we require destructor means to deallocate or destroy the memory previously allocated by constructors. That is called as destructors. జనరల్లీ మనకి డిస్ట్రక్టర్ అనేది ఆటోమేటికల్గా యాక్టివేట్ అవుతుంది ప్రోగ్రామ్ క్లోజ్ అయినప్పుడు లేదంటే క్లాస్ క్లోజ్ అయినప్పుడు డీయాక్టివేషన్ అనేది ఆటోమేటిక్గా జరిగిపోతుంది. సో డీయాక్టివేషన్ డిస్ట్రక్టర్ దేనికి యూజ్ చేస్తామంటే ప్రీవియస్లీ యూజ్ టు డిస్ట్రాయ్ ఆ డీఅలొకేట్ మెమరీ దట్ హ్యాడ్ ప్రీవియస్లీ అలోకేటెడ్ ఇట్. So this is the example of using destructor class. So what are the important points while using constructors or destructors? Constructor is automatically named when an object is created. Whenever you create any object in C++, any object means any class is created in, automatically constructor is raised. A constructor is named whenever an object is defined or dynamically allocating using the new operator. Generally, constructors are raised means automatically called whenever they are used or whenever they called up with constructor classes, and whenever we use new operator and delete operator, they are called as dynamic memory allocations. డైనమిక్ మెమరీ లొకేషన్స్కి మనము న్యూ ఆపరేటర్ అండ్ డిలీట్ ఆపరేటర్ ఇస్తాం, అప్పుడు కూడా కన్స్ట్రక్టర్ అనేవి ఆటోమేటికల్గా రైజ్ అవుతాయి. ఏ A constructor takes the same name as the class name. So constructor లేదా డిస్ట్రక్టర్ అనేది వాటికి ఫంక్షన్ నేమ్స్ ఎలా ఉంటాయంటే సేమ్ నేమ్ యాజ్ క్లాస్ నేమ్. క్లాస్ నేమ్కి ఏదైతే ఉందో అదే నేమ్ మనం కన్స్ట్రక్టర్కి లేదా డిస్ట్రక్టర్కి యూస్ చేస్తాము. ద డిఫరెన్స్ బిట్వీన్ కన్స్ట్రక్టర్ డిస్ట్రక్టర్ ఈస్ డిస్ట్రక్టర్ నేమ్ హ్యావ్ ఏ tilde symbol. Destructor name have a tilde symbol before the function. The programmer cannot declare a constructor as virtual or static or కాన్స్టెంట్. జనరల్లీ కన్స్ట్రక్టర్స్ అనేవి విర్చువల్ టైప్లో కానీ లేదంటే స్టాటిక్ టైప్లో కానీ లేదంటే సమ్ కాన్స్టెంట్ టైప్లో కానీ మనం డిక్లేర్ చేయలేము. నో రిటర్న్ టైప్ ఈజ్ స్పెసిఫైడ్ ఫర్ ఏ కన్స్ట్రక్టర్. నో రిటర్న్ టైప్ ఈజ్ స్పెసిఫైడ్ ఫర్ ఏ కన్స్ట్రక్టర్. జనరల్గా కన్స్ట్రక్టర్స్కి మనకి రిటర్న్ టైప్ అనేది ఉండదు. నో రిటర్న్ టైప్ ఈజ్ స్పెసిఫైడ్ రిక్వైర్డ్ ఫర్ ద కన్స్ట్రక్టర్. నాట్ ఈవెన్ వాయిడ్, అంటే వాయిడ్ కూడా యూస్ చేయము, అలాగే రిటర్న్ టైప్ అనేది కూడా మనకు ఉండదు. ద కన్స్ట్రక్టర్ మస్ట్ బి డిఫైన్డ్ ఇన్ ద పబ్లిక్, అంటే ఆల్ కన్స్ట్రక్టర్స్ షుడ్ బి డిక్లేర్డ్ విత్ ద పబ్లిక్ డేటా యాక్సెస్ స్పెసిఫైర్ ఓన్లీ. ద కన్స్ట్రక్టర్ మస్ట్ బి ఏ పబ్లిక్ మెంబర్ and overloading of constructors is possible, and each class can have only one default constructor. And every class have only one default constructor only. Destructors. So what are the destructors? So why we require constructors means constructors are generally used to initialize. Constructors are generally used to initialize some private variables. Initialize private variables in a class. ఒక క్లాస్లో ప్రైవేట్ వేరియబుల్స్ని మనం ఇనిషియలైజ్ చేయడానికి కన్స్ట్రక్టర్స్ అనేవి మనం జనరల్గా యూస్ చేస్తాం. సో డిస్ట్రక్టర్స్. వాట్ ఈస్ డిస్ట్రక్టర్స్? సమ్ ఇంపార్టెంట్ పాయింట్స్ అబౌట్ డిస్ట్రక్టర్స్. Destructors takes the same name as the class. So the name of the destructor is also same, but it is begins with a tilde symbol. It will begins with a tilde symbol. Like the constructor, the destructor must also be defined in the public. So both constructors and destructors should be defined as a public member. Both the constructor and destructor should be defined with public members only. The destructor must be a public member. The destructor does not take any argument, which means that the destructors cannot be overloaded. Means we cannot use, may not be use the overloaded concept. Overloaded means overloading of functions and overloading of operators. So overloading concept of both the destructors and the constructors are not possible. No written type is specified for destructors. Generally there is no written type for destructors also. By default destructors are having no written types and no written type of data or information. And the use of destructor is especially suitable when an object assigns dynamic memory during its lifetime, and at the moment of being destroyed we want to release the memory that the object was allocated. So mainly these destructors are mainly constructors and destructors are mainly used at dynamic memory allocation. Dynamic memory allocation concept. What is a dynamic memory allocation? Means we can create some variables or memory variables with our own means we can create our own dynamic memory with a dynamically allocation, and then in that time we may create and deallocate or remove the memory from the variables from the memory. That time we require destructors. And a class cannot have more than one destructor, and every class have only one default constructor and only one destructor only. Means not more than one cannot be used. Destructor can be virtual but constructor cannot be. So virtual destructors are allowed, but virtual constructors are not allowed. Overloading constructor. What is overloading? Overloading, yesterday we discussed about that. What is overloading means? Overloading means using the same function, using the same variable or same data member or same member function in a variety of ways or in variety of different ways. means we may use the same function with by changing number of arguments, by changing by changing return type, or by changing order of variables, or by changing number of variables, like that. Like any other function, a constructor can also be overloaded. Like any other function, a constructor so overloading constructors. Like any other function, a constructor can also be overloaded with more than one function that have the same name but different types or number of parameters. So what is overloading? What is the definition of overloading? Overloading is nothing but the function overloading of function or overloading of operator means the function name is same. We are using the same function name but in a different manner or a different way, that is in different number of arguments or parameters, or number of parameters or arguments are changed, means parameters and arguments total are changed and number also changed. So remember that for overloaded functions the compiler will call the one whose parameters match the arguments used in the function call. So these are the important functions of overloading. So that is the definition of overloading. So what is the overloading? Means overloading of operator or overloading of functions means using the same function name with different types, means different types of arguments with different number of changing the number of arguments and changing the order of arguments or parameters, or changing different types of using different types of arguments or parameters, but the function name is same. So need for constructors. So why we require constructors for classes in C++? So a structure or an array in C++ can be initialized at the time of their declaration. For example, struct like that, but so what are the different types of constructors? What are the different types of constructors? Constructors are basically three types. First one is default constructor, and second one is called as copy constructor. So these are the two important constructors. So what is default constructors? So default constructor means a constructor that does not accept any parameters is called as default constructors. For example, students students brackets is the default constructor for the class students, since it does not take any parameters. So what is colon is called as the it is an operator used for declaring classes classes and methods in the same class itself. It is a scope resolution operator. Double colon is called as a scope resolution operator. So what is the default constructor? Default constructor is mainly used to create or declare any constructor without any arguments or parameters supplied. So a constructor that does not accept any parameters is called as a default constructor, and a default constructor supplied by the compiler does not do anything special. It just initializes the data members with the dummy values. So what is the why we require default constructor, and how it can be used. So a default constructor is generally when we encounter with default constructor, the compiler simply do nothing. It initializes the private variables, or it initialize the all the private variables or all the data members in the constructor itself. So if a class has no explicit constructor defined, so this is the default constructor. So what is the default constructor? A class, a constructor that does not accept any parameters, or a class with no arguments or parameters. A class with no, or a constructor. A constructor, what is a default constructor? A constructor with no arguments or no parameter values is called as a default constructor. So this is the example for creating default constructors. Code fragment defines a constructor inside the class definition. Class X, int I, public, int j, int k, x colon. Again, I is equals to j is equal to k is equals to 0, bracket close, bracket close. So here the class name is x. I is the private variable or local variable. Public means we are initializing some other variables and other variables and constructors. Why? Because all the constructors are defined with public data type only. So public colon int j comma int k, and again we are using x. So class name is x, constructor name is x, class name is x, and constructor name is x, and x brackets means here there are no parameters or no arguments are passed. Here there are no parameters or no arguments are passed, so that it is called as a default constructor. In that we initialize all the variables, local public variables, like I is equal to j is equal to k is equal to 0. That is called as a constructor. The simple constructor x colon x brackets x bracket is an inline member function. Here. So this is another example of using constructors. Second type of constructor is copy constructor. So what is the different types of constructors? First type of constructor is called as default constructor, and second type of constructor is called as a copy constructor. The copy constructor is a constructor which creates an object by initializing it with an object of the same class which has been created previously. The copy constructor is used to initialize one object from another of the same type, copy an object to pass it as an argument to a function, copy an object to return it from a function. So what is a copy constructor? A copy constructor is a constructor of the form like that: class name within brackets, class name ampersand. So the copy constructor is a constructor which creates an object by initializing it with an object of the same class only. So in the copy constructors we may simply use the same class name. We may simply use the same class name as an object to initialize it or to pass it as a parameter or parameter to the original class. So next is destructors. So what are destructors? How to use them? What are the different rules and regulations for destructors? So destructors. So what are destructors? Why we require destructors? How to use destructors? Whenever an object is created within a program, it also needs to be destroyed. If a class has constructor to initialize members, you should also have a destructor to free up the used memory. A destructor, as the name suggested, destroys the values of the object. Destroys the values of the object. So, what are destructors? What are destructors? So, whenever an object is created within a program, it also needs to be destroyed. Similarly, if a class has constructor to initialize members, it should also have a destructor to free up the used memory. A destructor, as the name suggests, destroys the values of the object created by the constructor when the object goes out of scope. A destructor is also a member of function whose name is the same name as that of a class, but is preceded by a tilde symbol. So, destructors are used with a tilde symbol. For example, the destructor of class salesperson will be ampersand tilde salesperson. A destructor does not take any arguments, nor does it return any value. The compiler automatically calls them when the objects are destroyed. So, these are the points regarding destructors. So, whenever we created an object or created a constructor, it also needs destructors also. If a class has a constructor to initialize members, it should also have a destructor to free up the used memory. Generally, destructors are used to destroy the values of the objects created by the constructors in the C++ program. All these values are automatically goes to garbage values. So, a constructor is also a member of function. Generally, what is the difference between a constructor and destructor? Destructors also have the same name with a tilde symbol in it. So, destructors generally destructors have no arguments, and they can be destroyed the objects and classes and objects whenever the program will be closed, or whenever the program will terminate, or whenever the destructors are raised. So, copy constructors. So, another type of constructor is called as copy constructor. So, what is a copy constructor? The copy constructor is, however, defined in the class as a parameterized constructor receiving an object as argument passed by reference. So, in copy constructors, we may use same class name as parameter argument to create objects in the parameter definition. So, this is the simple example of using copy constructor. So, this is the example program for copy constructor. So, copy constructor explanation. So, right.